consequential arguments before the Supreme Court this morning. And Ian Millhiser, senior fellow with the Center for American Progress Action Fund, editor of Think Progress Justice, the legal blog over at thinkprogress.org, and the author of a new book, which is absolutely brilliant, Injustices, the Supreme Court's History of Comforting the Comfortable and Afflicting the Afflicted. Ian, welcome back to the program.
Good to be here. Thanks so much.
Thanks for joining us. So the death penalty very often falls into the category of afflicting the afflicted. How did the arguments go this morning?
My soul needed a shower after today's oral arguments. So the issue in this case, the narrow issue, is there's this drug called midazolam, and it's unclear whether it's an effective enough painkiller that you can give it to inmates before you kill them, so they don't feel the excruciating pain that they would otherwise feel before they're executed.
Right.
And what the case came down to is it basically came down to an issue of priority. Justice Kagan primarily, but the liberal side of the bench said, well, look, I mean, it's not constitutional to subject someone to excruciating pain. So if a particular painkiller, if you're not sure if it's effective or not, then that's not good enough. You have to be able to at least show that you're going to meet the mandate of the Constitution, not to subject them to pain. The conservatives seem to be saying, look, our primary concern is just making sure that this guy gets killed. And it's great if the state follows the Constitution, but if they can't get access to drugs that are more humane, or if they can't find some other way to do it, we just got to make sure that the execution moves forward. And I mean, that was ultimately why I came out of the argument feeling really dirty, because I was just surprised by how ghoulish it became.
Wow. Now, this court had for a while banned the death penalty, as I recall. And in fact, I remember watching an old BBC interview with Lewis Powell after he retired, in which he said that his greatest regret from his years on the bench was when he voted in favor of restoring the death penalty, that he felt that was a mistake. A, please fact check me on that, and B, any possibility that this court might reconsider the constitutionality of the death penalty itself?
I don't think there's any possibility that this court will. I mean, even the decision in the 1970s that paused the death penalty, it didn't strike down the death penalty itself. It didn't say that it is unconstitutional ever to execute someone. It said that the procedures that the states had been using up to that point to sort who would be executed from who shouldn't be executed weren't constitutionally adequate. And so until they came out with better procedures, they had to stop.
So it was the arbitrariness that they were concerned with, not the Eighth Amendment.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Now, I mean, if we had a better Supreme Court, the death penalty we have now is really arbitrary.
Yes.
One of the most determining factors, you can have two people who commit the exact same crime, and one of the most determinative factors as to whether or not they'll get the death penalty is whether or not they are black.
Right, or how black they look, in fact. There's actually a spectrum there which has been identified in death penalty cases, that the more classically African-American the more classically black a person looks, the more likely they are to get the death penalty. The lighter skinned they are, the more they may look like they're part white, the less likely they are to get the death penalty. And that's, within the context of African-American. That's pretty horrible, too.
Yeah, no, it's really terrible. And then, the other thing that I think is equally terrible is that, the way that death penalty trials work now is first you determine whether or not the person is guilty. And then if they're found guilty, there's then another, it's called the penalty phase of the trial, where, they discuss, okay, how horrible is this person's crime? Are there mitigating factors? Was this person abused as a child? Are there other reasons why, they shouldn't get the death penalty? Right. And that's a tremendously subjective inquiry. Right. Where the quality of the lawyer, both in terms of what information that lawyer is able to find, but also in terms of just how personally persuasive they are. Mm-hmm. And you know who normally gets better, more persuasive lawyers than everyone else?
Mostly rich white guys.
Yeah, exactly. So if we're going to kill someone, let's set aside the question of whether we should be killing someone. If we're going to concede that it's okay for the state to kill a human being, the question of whether or not we kill someone shouldn't be determined by the randomness of who happens to represent them in court.
Right. And but that that lays bare not just a problem. We're talking with Ian Millhiser with the Center for American Progress, author of Injustices, brilliant new book. That's not just an issue of the death penalty, Ian. That's an issue of our entire criminal justice system. The requirement that people be offered counsel, which the Supreme Court found earlier in this century, as I recall, or the last century, in the 20th century, and the failure of jurisdictions all around the country to adequately fund these things. I mean, a lot of these public defenders are wonderful, noble, great people, and some of them are just, they're drunks and they're falling asleep through the case.
Yeah, no, it's exactly right. I mean, why do we trust ourselves to decide whether or not to kill people? Why do we think we can handle capital crimes when we can't even handle shoplifting crimes in this country?
Right.
I mean, the Constitution, people have a constitutional right to a defense, but I know lots of public defenders. Most of them are very good people, but they're typically in very underfunded offices.
Right. And
when you're handling 150 cases a year or more, I mean, I've known attorneys who handled 4 cases in the same day. There's only but so good at your job that you could be when you have that much attention to pay to each client. And so it leads to this world where, the way that many, quite possibly most criminal prosecutions play out is that the prosecutor says, all right, if I push for the maximum sentence, because of course the maximum sentence is always inflated, for this petty crime you committed, you could get 5 years. And I'll give you only 3 years. And if you agree to that, then you get to see your family in 3 years. If you don't, I'm going to go for the full 5 years. Or, depending on what the crime is, it could be I could go for the full 50 years. And then here you are, looking at, years of your life. The only person you have on your side is a defense attorney who's overworked and underpaid. And, you may be innocent, but what are you going to do in that situation?
Right. So how do you think we have a minute left here, Ian? How do you think the court's going to come down on this thing? Using my understanding is that this drug is it's either a benzo drug or it's in that family. It's more of a hypnotic than it is an analgesic. It doesn't kill pain; it just kills consciousness, and doesn't do a particularly good job of that. Putting people to sleep. I mean, sleep, not dead sleep.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, it's very unclear whether the drug is at all effective as an anesthetic, at least at the levels at the huge doses that are at issue in this case.
Right.
And unfortunately, it looks like there's a high likelihood that the court's going to say that this is okay. I mean, even Justice Kennedy, who's the swing vote on the death penalty, seemed to think it was okay. The things that I think it's important to keep in mind about the case is even if, the Supreme Court rules against the use of this drug, it's really rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic, because Oklahoma just passed a law saying, okay, if we can't use this drug to kill people, then we're going to asphyxiate them.
Right.
I mean, it is now on the books in Oklahoma that if they can't use this drug, it'll just prevent the person from breathing and from getting any oxygen until they die.
Let's just stick them in a U-Haul trailer and hook it up to the tailpipe of the car that's pulling it. That's amazing. Ian Millhiser.
Yeah,
Think Progress.org. Thank you, Ian.
Thank you.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And you can check out Ian's book. It's called Injustices, the Supreme Court's History of Comforting the Comfortable and Afflicting the Afflicted, and well worth reading. We'll be right back.